Let's dig in because I was fascinated by your story in front office sports from, I guess it might have been Friday. It's either Friday or Saturday, which explains because we have this House versus the NCAA, and people are worried now that the universities are going to be devoting so much money to football and men's basketball and probably women's basketball, the sports that help pay their bills, that they're going to ignore Olympic sports. Not to mention, we've got this, especially with the Pac-12 essentially dissolving with Southern Cal and UCLA in the Big Ten, along with Oregon and Washington, that a lot of those sports, those Olympic sports, they're afraid that they're going to fall apart. So there's apparently another, I don't even know if it's a conference or a league or an organization called the Mountain Pacific Sports Federation that is a home for a lot of college sports. And I'm fascinated by this. What is the MPSF?
Yes, well, I was very embarrassed as a Los Angeles native, and like growing up a UCLA sports fan, have never heard of this league. So anyone who hasn't heard of it, who's a college sports fan, don't feel bad because I had never even heard of it until literally a month ago when I started reporting this story. So basically, it's an official NCAA conference, but conferences that we think about normally are organized around teams, right?
Right.
This conference is organized around sports. And even though it has multiple sports, it's in the categorization of a, quote, single sport conference. They've been around since 1992, and I believe one of the first sports that they started to sponsor was men's water polo.
Okay.
But since then, they've grown exponentially. This past season, they sponsored 11 sports. They're going to be sponsoring even more this upcoming year. And with specifically conference realignment, really, which, as we've been talking about since last summer, has forced Olympic sports teams to have to travel across the country, right? I mean, Stanford regularly has the most athletes in the Olympics.
Right.
Their athletes are now going to have to travel all the way across the country to even get to their closest conference rival. When you talk about the cost of Olympic sports, that is going to increase the cost of Olympic sports exponentially. So the MPSF has sort of come in, especially with the breakup of the Pac-12, as this catch-all league for these Olympic sports that in many cases, were powerhouses in the Pac-12, which was obviously West Coast and regional. So think like beach volleyball, water polo, sports that are very strong on the West Coast, maybe not in other parts of the country. And this league has basically, without a lot of money, with only a few employees, with an annual budget of less than $1 million, which is pretty crazy when you consider that, there are athletic departments like Ohio State that rake in more than $200 million.
Right.
They've been sending more than 100, affiliated athletes and coaches to the last couple Olympic Games. And they're operating this very successful model where they're allowing Olympic sports teams to have leagues, especially in places that, or, in schools that found themselves either in a conference where the athletes are going to have to travel across the country, or they find themselves in a conference where there is no league for their sport. I mean, that was the case for Big 12 and Big 10 beach volleyball athletes who came from the Pac-12. They woke up and said, "Wait a second, my school just joined a conference that doesn't sponsor beach volleyball. What are we going to do?" The Big 12 said they're going to start a beach volleyball league. Okay, that's good. That's one way to do it, right? But I believe they only have 4 teams.
Right.
So a lot of the Big 10 schools joined the MPSF. And starting this fall, it's basically going to be like Pac-12 Light plus, I believe, Grand Canyon. And, they're sending champions to the Olympics every year. yesterday I watched the beach volleyball team. I can't tell you the names of the fabulous athletes because I'm not a beach volleyball expert. I know I know next to nothing, but they were from USC. And one of NBC's correspondents, Dane Blanton, is USC's coach. I talked to him last week. So that's a very long answer to your short question. I'm sorry, but I'm really fired up about this league.
It is incredible. Now, you mentioned Stanford along with Cal and SMU, but let's just deal with Stanford and Cal because you say Stanford routinely produces more Olympians. They sponsor more sports, Stanford does, I believe, than any other university in the country. And I know Stanford and Cal both play water polo. I'm fairly certain the ACC does not sponsor water polo. So will Stanford and Cal take their a lot of those sports and put them in the Mountain Pacific Sports Federation?
Well, they could. It's an option. If the ACC decides not to sponsor these sports, or if the schools look at the budgets and the travel expenses and realize this is not worth it.
Right.
Again, the MPSF doesn't have the name recognition of the Big Ten or the SEC, but it's also they send more Olympians to Paris, to Tokyo than almost every single league outside of a few of the power conferences. So it's extremely competitive, and there's nothing sort of diminished about being an MPSF conference champion in these Olympic sports. So it's absolutely an opportunity that, could help, at least in the short term, for sure, allow these schools to sort of have their cake and eat it too, right? Then your football team and your basketball teams all over the country in the league that's making, billions of dollars in TV money, but keep your Olympic sports more regional and more local. And also keep in mind that, a lot of these sports it benefits you to have regional competition, right? I mean, there are sports that are big on the West Coast, not so much the East Coast, and vice versa. Fencing is a huge East Coast sport, not quite as much West Coast, but the MPSF provides a home for West Coast, fencing teams and athletes who want to excel in that sport on the West Coast. So it's just it's so incredibly important to be thinking outside the box right now, because the Olympic development pipeline in the United States is the NCAA. And
it is, no question about it. It's was it 3/4 of Olympic athletes, I think, either this time or last time, had some connection to intercollegiate athletics. Amanda Christovich is joining us here on the Adam Gold Show. Let me just ask you one more question. We really ran out of time. I appreciated the long answer because it eliminated a whole bunch of questions that I had. You answered all. No, it's fine. You answered all of them. That's if I'm asking you about these things, much more of you than me is the goal here. So my last question is these are not club sports. These are NCAA sports, just housed in a separate entity. I guess if you can't find a home in another league, Stanford could always go and maybe just play water polo in the West Coast Conference or something like that, because we see that routinely around college sports. But what is the financial opportunity for the athletes, for the schools to maybe monetize this in a league like the Mountain Pacific Sports Federation? Is there one?
Yeah, I mean, look, they're not going to be making millions of dollars off of this league. But the league is set up such that their dues, are very low. Essentially any revenue they make goes to the teams.
Right.
They have, they've had really impressive sponsorship conversations. Companies like Speedo have expressed interest, and that helps not just with money rolling into the conference that can go back down to these Olympic sports teams, right? As an independent funding model, right? Because you need to find now we're going to need to start finding independent funding models for these Olympic teams, right? it also just like, the equipment could be sponsored. The travel could be sponsored. Sure. It just lowers the cost. Television deal TBD. We'll see what, the MPSF is working on some negotiations right now. So we'll see what sort of exposure or TV dollars they get. But they basically said, like, look, if we get, $5,000 for a sport, we're going to send it to our schools. And that's going to help them not, when they're looking for revenue streams after having to pay their football players, God forbid, they're going to be able to, they're going to have some independent funding. So, it's the best model that anyone's come up with so far.
And beach volleyball is huge on television.
Yeah.
Beach volleyball is especially during the day, because it's relatively inexpensive to televise, to actually produce. Man, it's on all the time. Amanda Christovich. I've been mispronouncing her name for 2 years now. From front office sports. A Christovich with an extra H on the end for family reasons. I appreciate your time always. We'll talk to you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
You got it. Amanda Christovich here on the Adam Gold Show. I'm fascinated by this thing. I think should have their own network. They need their own Paul Feinbaum.
Yeah.
Exactly. Mountain Pacific Sports Federation needs their own Paul Feinbaum.
Now we know what it means.
Exactly.
And they need a Paul.
Oh, I haven't. I never heard of the MPSF.
No.
Before reading that article.